excellent talk. We're not going to take questions and answers until the very end. So we're going to move on to our next talk, which is by Gearoid O'Brien, who I think needs a little introduction to most of you. Gearoid was the librarian in Athlone for many years and has a wealth of knowledge about everything in the Midlands. So he's going to talk to us about yachting and Athlone from 1770, including Killinure Yacht Club. Gearoid.
Okay, thanks very much to the Commodore and to the committee for inviting me here. I'm the odd man out. I'm the only non-sailor, I think, here on this group. But I do know that my wife's family came down from the Black Island, so I have some little connection there. And of course, Harman mentioned Brian Baru would be an ancestor of mine, so another sailor. I'm going to speak briefly about the early days of Lough Yacht Club. No?
It's the right one.
Sorry.
It's not the centre thing.
Sorry, yeah.
No.
What's that? That side, yeah. Grand. Okay, so in speaking about the early days of the Yacht Club, I have to lean heavily on the researches of the late Billy English, who penned a short history of the club in 1970 to mark its bicentenary. And I hear that there are copies available for sale now. Up to this, that little booklet has been as rare as hen's teeth, and book collectors have been very anxious to get their hands on it. So thankfully there are some copies becoming available. Firstly, let me say that if any concrete evidence survives to verify the date of the foundation of the club, we're all unaware of its whereabouts. What we can say, however, is that the date of 1770 has been accepted by both the Royal Yachting Association and Lloyd's Register of Yachting as the date of the foundation of the club. We must assume that when the club was first affiliated to the Royal Yachting Association, that evidence of its 18th century foundation were still extant. The problem with club records is that often minutes, if they were kept, were held in the custody of a club member. These were presumably stored in homes of committee members and often accidentally lost or discarded at a later date by somebody who didn't recognise their historical significance. Apart from some early newspaper reports, which can be notoriously vague, there's no documentary evidence available to us from this early period. We may find the odd mention of a regatta, as Harman mentioned, but we don't know whether it was a sailing regatta or a rowing regatta. And we don't know whether it was organised by a yacht club or a boat club. Newspapers generally can be a very useful source of information on sporting and social activities. But unfortunately, the survival rate for 18th century Irish provincial newspapers is rather poor. As I mentioned, they were often quite non-specific in their reportage, as is the case with the following report of an early regatta. Harman mentioned that this example actually was found in a national newspaper by a Professor G.T. Stokes, who was a native of Athlone, and probably got it in a publication called Pew's Occurrences, which was published in July 1731. And it was quoted by him in an article which he wrote on Athlone in the 18th century, about a century ago. And I quote, "A book hunt was announced for every evening of the week, a regatta, a ball, and other diversions every evening for a week, from Monday the 26th of July to Saturday the 31st of July, 1731. Again, as I say, a little bit vague, but at least it is an indication that something was happening here in this locality in terms of recreational boating or sailing in the early to mid 18th century. We haven't discovered any evidence of a celebration to mark the centenary of the club in 1870. In fact, the first article to record the early history of the club was published in the Athlone Civic Week brochure in 1950. The article was written by Captain A. Wolfe Smith, affectionately known as Squeaky, and it states that founded as it was in the year 1770 or thereabouts, the Lough Yacht Club is the second oldest club in the country, the Royal Cork Yacht Club being the oldest. He laments the loss of the minute books and programmes. However, he goes on to state, from the records which survive and from information contained in letters recently found, it's possible to piece together a coherent account of the beginnings and developments of the club. Captain Wolfe Smith may have come across some letters in the family archives, perhaps in Portlick Castle, or indeed he may have been shown letters in the archives of another local family. It seems likely that his family, the Smiths, could well have been involved in the club from the beginnings in 1770. The club, as most of you probably know, was originally called Athlone Yacht Club and was generally known as such until it underwent a name change in 1895, becoming Lough Yacht Club. So who might the earliest members of Athlone Yacht Club have been? Who in the vicinity of Athlone may have had the time and inclination to become involved in leisure sailing? Yachting was regarded as the preserve of the upper classes. In Britain, with the involvement of royalty in the sport, it soon became the preserve of the aristocracy, as well as the officers of the army and the navy. Apart from the Smiths of Portlick, presumably some of the Hancocks may have been involved, as I presume were the Hodsons and Gunnings of Hodson Bay and St. John's. One clue that the Hodsons may have had an early interest in sailing can be gleaned from the fact that on top of Hodson's Pillar, which I'm sure many of you know out at Hodson Bay, on the very top is a little carved stone boat of the type that were sailed here in the 18th century. The boat, it's a replica of this type of boat that Harman has already shown you, painted by Daniel Gross. We can also be pretty sure that apart from members of the landed gentry, and perhaps some leading business people of the day, that the membership was most likely boosted by the officers serving in the local garrison, as well as any retired army or naval officers who were living in the vicinity of the lake. The regiment stationed in Athlone about the time of the founding of the Yacht Club included the 5th Cavalry Regiment, the 5th Cavalry Regiment, the Princess of Charlotte of Wales Dragoon Guards, the 27th Regiment of Foot, better known as the Enniskillen Regiment, the 57th Regiment of Foot, the West Middlesex Regiment, and the 14th Cavalry Regiment, the King's Hussars. So these were all the guys that might have been here. So what did these early sailors look like? That was actually we'll just go back to that one. So what did these early sailors look like? We can say for certain that they were all well turned out and looked very smart in their club uniforms. While we don't have exact details for Athlone, the uniforms adopted by early yacht clubs all bore a great resemblance to one another. It's fairly safe to assume that the rules and regulations of Athlone Yacht Club were based largely on those of the Water Club of the Harbour of Cork, which had been founded in 1720. Just that one again. The rule number 5 of the Killinure Yacht Club, as issued to its members in August 1831, says, "The members are always to appear on board their boats in the blue uniform, blue jacket with appropriate buttons, waistcoat of white cashmere with the club buttons, trousers blue, white or checkered, as the members might think proper to wear." So that's... early yacht clubs appear to have concentrated on pleasure sailing rather than competitive racing, and a cruising company was usually the order of the day. Competitive racing came a little bit later. Mike Bender, in his book A New History of Yachting, remarks that the rules of the Water Club of Cork reoccur frequently in the rule books of later yacht clubs. The early yacht clubs aimed at exclusivity. Membership was generally limited. A member could only bring one non-member to any activity of the club, and the members would be held responsible for their guests' good behaviour. The exclusivity was further enhanced by their headquarters. The headquarters, which were generally, page here. The headquarters or clubhouses were often located on an island. In Cork, of course, they were on Hallbow Line. In Athlone, it was on Carbery Island. I think there should be a picture of Carbery there. Vincent Delaney discovered an advertisement in May 1834 when the owner of Carbery, Edmund Digges Latouche, offered the island for rent. The accommodation on the island consisted of a one-room cottage with a recently built extension with 4 bedrooms, and it seems likely that when this was being offered that it probably marked the end of the use of the island as a headquarters for Athlone Yacht Club. Mike Bender in his book also comments on the purpose of the rules of the yacht clubs were to put a structure in place to strengthen the bond between members. In the case of Cork, they met for sailing and dining once a fortnight between April and September. There was generally a concern about dress and dress codes and uniforms. Again, in the case of Cork, members were forbidden to wear long-tailed wigs, large sleeves or ruffles. Members were obliged to wear their yacht club uniforms at all club activities. The same probably applied here in Athlone. While we don't have details of the early rules for Athlone Yacht Club, we do have details of the splinter group, Killinure Yacht Club, which was set up about 60 years after Athlone Yacht Club. These rules, though they had considerably fewer than the Cork Yacht Club, were based on that model, or more likely in this instance they were based on the rules of Athlone Yacht Club, which they had broken away from. I think it was Brendan Behan who said that the first item on the agenda of any Republican group is the split. It's a very Irish thing. In the case of the Yacht Club, it took 60 years for this split to happen, and Captain Wolf Smith in his article recorded that the club was divided into 2 political groups, one of which broke away to form the Killinure Yacht Club. He went on to mention that they had their clubhouse on Friars Island, while the clubhouse of Athlone Yacht Club, as already mentioned, was located on Carbery Island. Harry Rice, in his classic book, Thanks for the Memory, records the Killinure Yacht Club used both Temple Island and Friars Island as their base. While they may have used the small lodge of the Harris Temple family on Temple Island, they may have put a tent or a marquee on Friars Island. A clue to the lack of a permanent clubhouse may be contained in Rule 17 of the club, which stated that each member must provide for himself and friends when the club proceeds on a cruise a camp chair or stool. Sorry, you didn't have to bring your own chairs today. So. In 1970, to mark the bicentenary of Lough Yacht Club, the late Billy English produced a very useful 34-page booklet on the history of the club. Billy's father, Robert Shaw English, was a member of the club in the early 20th century. Billy includes a transcription of a document which is dated the 22nd of August 1831, the date of establishment of the Killinure Yacht Club. It lists the 10 founder members and includes a list of 14 regulations of the club. The breakaway club was short-lived, however, lasting perhaps only 5 seasons, because by 1836, 2 of the founding members of Killinure Yacht Club were once again serving on the committee of Athlone Yacht Club. The rules of the Killinure Yacht Club make for interesting reading. In all, there were just 14 rules, all quoted by Billy in the appendix to this booklet. The club are to assemble on board the respective boards at Temple Island on the 1st and 3rd Mondays in every month during the season, commencing from the 1st Monday in May and ending the last Monday in September at 11 o'clock a.m., or on such other days as the Commodore, or in his absence the Vice Commodore, may order. Each boat shall carry at her mast the distinguishing flag of the club, a white burgee with the letters KYC in red. Any other flag the members choose to hoist is to be worn at the peak. The Commodore or the Vice Commodore only to carry the Union Jack at their peak. Rule number 9 was members will dine together with their friends in the mess tent at 6 o'clock each day when the club are out on a cruise, and breakfast at 9 o'clock precisely in the mess tent as agreed. Wine not allowed at mess, but the best spirits to be provided by the purser. When the fleet is to return home after dinner, 1 glass of grog only allowed. Any member disobeying this order will be fined 5 shillings, which shall be demanded by the secretary on the fleet coming to their moorings. 1 servant only to be fed at the mess from each boat, and 2 from the tender boat, and those to be under the immediate order of the purser. And rule number 12, a code of signals will be established for the club, which must not, on any account, be divulged to other pleasure boats. The first known programme of Athlone Yacht Club Regatta dates to August 1836, when the club organised a 3-day regatta with a rendezvous point here at Ballyglass. There was a stipulation on the programme that no race would be held unless there were at least 3 entrants in the class. On the first day, members competed for a silver cup valued 30 guineas for yachts not exceeding 30 tons. This was open to yachts from all parts of Ireland. A second race that day for a silver cup valued 15 guineas was for gentlemen's 4-oared gigs with not more than a 30-foot keel, so it was a rowing race. On the second day, the first race was for a silver cup valued 20 guineas for yachts not exceeding 23-foot keel. But this race was confined to gentlemen residing between Lanesborough and Shannon Bridge. No mention of ladies. The second race for a silver salver valued 15 guineas were for yachts not exceeding 30 tons, and this was a time race. On the other races that day were all rowing races. On the third day, a local MP, Captain George B. Matthew, a Tory who had been put forward for election as MP by the Hancocks, had presented a gold cup for yachts. This was again a time race, and entry was confined to members of Athlone Yacht Club or other inhabitants of Athlone and its vicinity. He was looking after his constituents. The final sailing race was for a silver cup valued 15 guineas for yachts with a keel of less than 19 foot. And again, this was confined to owners of yachts living between Lanesborough and Shannon Bridge, and other rowing races were held that day. While a few of the trophies could be won outright, others depended on being won by the same owner 2 or 3 times in succession. A young man from Moat, John Keegan, who worked with the Ordnance Survey, kept a diary between 1836 and 1847, which was edited and published by his grandson, Reverend Wallace Clare, in 1928. The diary entry in 1837 reads, "Hogan, Thornley and I went to Glasson. East Hill, which rises gently over Ballykieran, is a small neat building occupied by the Messrs. Cuppage, half a dozen fine fellows, nephews to Lord Castlemaine. Anna House and Lacken Lodge, or Oatlands, are the residence of Simon and Gerald Dillon, very hospitable and generous gentlemen who belong to an ancient family, but poor more's the pity. Ballyglass Hill lies between Ballykieran and the Shannon. It is here that the tents are pitched and the people assemble annually to witness the regatta on Lough. Thornley and I went there in August, and a pleasant day we had, although we got wet to the skin in crossing from Westmeath to the Roscommon side, where the regatta was held this year. Mr. John O'Connell, who was present, is a small man, about 5 foot 5 inches, with sandy whiskers, and probably about 29 years of age. I saw his father, Daniel O'Connell, a large stout man, in Athlone last winter." So now I hope I have navigated you successfully through the first 70 years or so of Athlone